everybody, Zongets 134 here.
And as always, I'm Joe's Squad.
And welcome to another episode of Remember the Hyphen, the show where we look at comic books, movies, and everything in between. And welcome back to another episode of Spider-Man, everybody. I'm sure you're tired of it by now, but we don't give a shit.
Update! Apparently nobody gives a shit if you're tired about it.
And if you want to say anything about it, step up. I bought this today.
Wish I had one of those pumpkin bombs. I can just start throwing up and down.
This isn't even like Spider-Man related. It's a Nightwing Eskrima stick. I don't know why. But anyway, so tonight, Cole, why don't you explain what we're doing since you're the one who came up with this?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about arguably two of the most important issues in Spider-Man's entire history, which is...
his crippling guilt complex.
Adding to the crippling guilt of fuckers that have died on this man, sadly. We're going to be doing specifically the death of Gwen Stacy. This is my trade of just both Gwen's death and Captain Stacy's death. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what... I think this is a premiere edition.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a premiere edition. So, I mean, it's like kind of nice leather bound with embossed. I also have these issues in my Amazing Volume 4.
Yeah.
And to be honest, this thing's been reprinted 1,000 fucking times.
Yeah, in fact, I want to say even now, you no longer just get the night Gwen Stacy died anymore. You get both the death of George and...
Yeah, because they pack them in together anymore.
Well, to be fair, they're only like 2 issues long each, so it's you kind of have to pay. You have to do that to get your bang for the buck. Which, those of you wondering what issues, this covers Amazing... well, I know with the night Gwen Stacy died, it's 120,
121 through 122.
121 to 122. But with George, I forget which ones those are.
Issues number 88 through 92.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, that's surprisingly long. I didn't realize that the George...
Well, it doesn't happen until the very end, because most of that, the selected issues, he's fighting Dr. Octopus.
Yeah, that's right. Because Doc Ock being ridiculous, basically. But, anyhow, so... more or less, these issues are, like Colton said, basically are the kind of defining moments in Spider-Man history. They all happen pretty much in a succinct amount of time. In fact, the only part of this whole I wouldn't say story arc, but whole story thing together actually, I think only doesn't include the issues where Harry was on LSD or whatever drugs it was he was on.
LSD. They mentioned it being LSD.
Okay.
But
I can't remember if it was...
I debate that because LSD doesn't do that kind of shit.
Well, not the first time. It was something else, but I know the second time it was LSD. But basically, Peter's been going through some rough shit in these couple arcs. And then our old buddy Gary Conway decided, yeah, fuck the blonde chick. We're going to fucking off her.
Which I think he actually has a foreword in this.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. Keep going. I'll know if I find it.
Basically... these stories are important because they do mark a couple things. Of course, the death of George Stacy is important. It's just a lot of us don't think about it as much, but it technically is. And of course, the death of Gwen, which is important not just for Spider-Man, but also comic books in general. Because this is actually what many argue is the end point of the Silver Age.
And forward, by the way, so I'll let you finish.
Yeah. Basically, this is the beginning of the Bronze Age, where heroes could fail, more or less. Just because, not often does the hero fail to save his girlfriend. Like, it's one thing to fail saving, like, a family figure, or just family in general, or, like, other characters, but very rarely has the hero failed as badly as Spider-Man did at this point. But anyway, Gary...
this is from Gary Conway, Los Angeles, 2007.
Okay.
So I'll just go ahead and read this whole thing. It's 2 pages, but I'll make it quick because I think he brings up some good points in here, which we can kind of springboard off of. Because we won't go into too much detail on what actually happens because I think everybody at this point knows this story.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the comic version, you've seen the one that's in TASM.
Yeah.
So. Here's a thought experiment. Let's try to imagine a Marvel universe in which Gwen Stacy didn't die way back in Amazing Spider-Man issues number 121. What sort of place might that be? Well, for starters, if Gwen hadn't died, would she and Peter Parker have gotten married? Would they have been happy together? What kind of challenges would they have faced in their relationship? What kind of man would Peter have become if Gwen had been at his side instead of Mary Jane? Would Peter and Gwen have been as dramatic and interesting as Peter and Mary Jane? Would their relationship have been as much fun? Without Gwen's deft to prey on his consciousness, would Peter have delved into the dark side of his powers as he did during the Venom saga? The movie version of our favorite web swinger notwithstanding. You can tell this came out right on the heels of
because this is
Spider-Man 3.
He wrote this just about on the time it was coming out.
Yeah. Would his world have been as dark? And what about the rest of the Marvel Universe? Without the death of Gwen Stacy and the controversies it engendered, would other writers and artists have explored the dark side of the heroes whose adventures they chronicled? Would Jim Starlin have killed off Captain Marvel? Would Chris Claremont have created Dark Phoenix? Hard to say. One thing we do know, if Gwen hadn't died, and if she hadn't died in the way she did, depending on how you interpret that fatal snap, the Marvel Universe would have been a very different place than it is today.
Yeah, Jean might have actually stayed dead.
Well, I actually found out Chris Claremont was actually against that even happening.
Oh.
Against them bringing her back.
Oh, well, yeah, because, like...
Yeah, he was against that.
Well, yeah, because Chris was like, that was my...
Well, no, he thought people would automatically have sympathy for Madeline even if she went evil.
Yeah.
So he thought it was a bad idea.
Which, I mean, to be fair, people still like Madeline, so...
Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is for you to decide. 30-odd years ago, when I wrote the stories collected in this volume, I was a callow youth barely out of my teens. All I wanted to do was write the kind of adventure I enjoyed reading as a kid. I started reading Spider-Man with issue number 1, and later found a copy of Amazing 15 in a neighborhood junk store on sale for a nickel. When I was 10 years old. I'm sure a lot of us would love to find that kind of
for
deal.
a nickel.
When I was 10 years old. As I became a teenager, I identified more and more with Peter's trials and tribulations. And when he finally met Mary Jane Watson in that classic final panel of Amazing issue number 42, I was as blown away as he was and fell in love with her instantly, just as he did. A few years later, I was given the opportunity of a lifetime to become the first regular scripter of Amazing Spider-Man, following the immortal Stan Lee.
Yeah, because Stan only wrote the first 100 issues of Amazing.
Yeah, so this would have been...
And I want to say Gary only wrote up until 200, I want to say.
Yeah, so he wrote... So he didn't start writing until 100, because the ones with George Stacy in here are written by Stan. So,
Okay.
Where was it? It was a dream assignment, especially for a kid from Queens who felt that in some strange way Peter Parker was a kind of alter ego. During the time I scripted his adventures in the mid-70s, Peter and I were about the same age. His inner world was a reflection of my own at that time. His self-doubts, his self-discovery mirrored what I was going through myself, and hopefully the self-doubts and self-discovery of his readers. So when the chance came to bring Peter and Mary Jane together to make them the couple I always thought they should be, I seized it. See, I'll be honest with you. I never much liked Gwen Stacy. Quite a mythology has grown up around Gwen after her death. She has been iconized, particularly in Kurt Busiek's brilliant miniseries Marvels, but much of what has made her interesting in retrospect wasn't all that apparent when she was alive.
So I guess Conway didn't really like Spider-Man Blue.
I don't think he gave a shit about Blue, honestly. 'Cause I don't think he read it.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say, like, I was just, because, like, it sounds like he didn't read Blue.
In my view, Gwen is only interesting now because she's dead and because of the manner of her death.
Okay, now I'm just imagining him wearing a Batman outfit and going up to Gwen like, let's face it, Gwendolyn, the last time anyone got any sort of enjoyment from you was when you were dead.
Oh, sure, she was sweet and she was beautiful, but that's pretty much all you can say about her. Sweet and beautiful Gwen. Sweet, beautiful, boring Gwen. So much like so many other girlfriends of heroes in those bygone days. Notice I say heroes and girlfriends. Fact is, there weren't too many heroines and boyfriends at Marvel, or anywhere else in those days. So much like, for instance, Daredevil's Karen Page, Iron Man's Pepper Potts, Captain America's unnamed blonde CIA agent in Strange Tales, Thor's Jane Foster, the Hulk's Betty Ross, and of course, Reed Richards' Sue Storm.
You know, sorry, I know I keep interrupting, but it's at least he didn't do what Frank Miller did to Karen Page and made her a porn star / heroin addict.
I'm going to try to finish this. So
yeah, sorry.
They were all sweet. They were all sweet and beautiful, and dare I say it, boring. But not Mary Jane Watson. Of all Stan's female creations, Mary Jane had a unique personality. She had attitude. She was, in an old cliche, sassy. Sassy and beautiful, with a hint of secret pain in her past. Plus, she was a redhead. I had a thing for redheads back in those days.
So did Stan.
So for me, it was an easy call. Who did I want to write about? Gwen Stacy, sweet, beautiful, and boring, or Mary Jane Watson, redheaded, sassy, and secretly pained? Mary Jane won hands down, which meant Gwen had to die. Seemed like a good idea at the time, and 30 years later, it still does. You can read about the how and why and who did what in the creation of these stories elsewhere. Did Stan know what we were planning? Was killing Gwen John Romita's idea, or was it mine? Did Gil Kane draw the final battle between Spidey and the Green Goblin, or was it redrawn by John after the fact? Did I add the snap sound effect at the last minute, or did I always plan to raise questions about our hero's contribution to his loved one's final fate? Those are questions that can't really be answered because they depend on some very human memories of events long past. And memory, as any psychologist will tell you, is self-deceiving. Truth is ambiguous. Memories are full of what-ifs and what might have been. What is true is that these stories are classics of an age now past. They're a window on a world that no longer exists. They show the way to a world that might have been, and they were a lot of fun to write. I hope you find them as much fun to read as I found them to write. So that one thing before I turn it back over to you, one thing I want to state after reading it, because I think Conway's introduction to this really brings forward a point that I see made a lot about these issues, is that there is a very big mythology around Gwen Stacy since these issues. There was a really good YouTube video I found that I want to say was about 25-30 minutes, really dove into every time she showed up. Yeah. And just kind of showed that it's like a lot of the mythology is incorrect. Yeah. Like, it's not... Gwen, honestly, kind of went through, like, a personality change more than once in the early part of her appearances, which a lot of people just kind of skim over and think that when she died, that's how she was the whole time.
Yeah, not only that, but, like, everyone always draws Gwen, like, she did it when
she looked very different when she first showed up.
She had like, much more sharper eyes. She more or less was, like, another Veronica, whereas... Because one of the other things, if you're talking about Gwen... The other thing is everyone thinks Mary Jane was the Betty in that. No, they were two Veronicas fighting over the same guy. It was never a Betty-Veronica thing like a lot of people make it out to be.
And it's interesting you bring up Mary Jane, because another thing I see a lot in this mythology is that a lot of the people that believe the mythology surrounding Gwen are ones that don't like Mary Jane.
Yeah, more or
less. Such as Joe Quesada or maybe Dan Slott. Yeah. More so Joe Quesada, because I know he's talked about that a couple times. But it's really interesting how these two issues not only had such a huge impact on the Spider-Man mythos and the fact that we see the effect of this for years afterwards. Yeah. Even up to the point where him and Mary Jane are getting married, he is still... really overwrought by that guilt.
I mean, and who could blame him? Because there were multiple times where Peter had thought about marrying Gwen before she died. Say what you will, regardless of the mythology and the stuff around it. Peter loved this woman. She was arguably his first love. I mean, he dated some other girls. He pined after Liz Allen. He dated Betty. He had a fling with Felicia. Well, okay, admittedly, the fling with Felicia happened after both his breakup with Mary Jane and the death of Gwen Stacy, but regardless of, he still loved this woman, and I think a lot of the people, that grew up reading this run, also fell in love with Gwen because she was the first girl that they saw Peter with. I don't think it nearly matters as much with Betty because let's be honest, Betty had no personality back then, as much as people. Bring up his many different girlfriends.
Yeah, but it's very interesting that. There's just this huge mythology surrounding these characters, and I mean, I've told you a couple times as someone who's been on Tumblr and is on Tumblr pretty regularly. Yeah, I've seen a lot of this, like this ship war is still going on, which is rather surprising.
Yeah, especially because I feel like most of the people that are doing this shipping war either have never read these issues or mostly doing it from the modern writers in there,
such as through Spider-Man Blue, or couple other sources. It's interesting how that came to be when you really actually sit down and look at the issues themselves. Yeah,
I want to say this year for Valentine's Day we should review Spider-Man Blue just because I think it'd be.
I'm down for it.
Then because I need to read it because I've read snippets of it and I know a lot about Blue. But one of the things that I think a lot of people like to use Blue as well.
But they pick and choose out of it. And a big issue I have with Spider-Man Blue is that it retcons and changes a lot of stuff. Yeah. To kind of... I want to say, for me, Spider-Man Blue, even though it has this moment near the end where MJ, tells Peter, tell Gwen I miss her too. Blue, it a lot of times comes off as them being at each other's throats a lot. Which, when you actually read the actual issues, is not the case.
Always the case, yeah. They certainly had catty moments, particularly that really infamous scene where MJ more or less kind of tells Gwen that, oh, you picked a real winner there. Like, I remember I can't remember exactly the issue, because as much as I am an apocrypha when it comes to Spider-Man, I don't know every issue off the top of my head, but there's one where, like, Peter, like, either runs out of the party or does something, like, it's either Gwen's birthday or George's.
It's probably Gwen's birthday party,
Yeah.
so I think I know what issue you're talking about.
And basically, Peter, I want to say kind of, like, is kind of curt to her, but I want to say it's because he's dying of some sort of poison or something like that. Because it wouldn't be Spider-Man without him dying of something.
This is the one where he comes back and reveals to the whole party that he's like, no, I'm Spider-Man. And
yeah.
no one believes him, which is hilarious.
Yeah, because he had the flu?
Except Captain Stacy. I think Captain Stacy had figured it out at that point.
Captain Stacy knew, like, a long time. But yeah, like, and basically, MJ makes a really snide remark, which actually kind of works in hindsight, now knowing that MJ has known Peter's Spider-Man since, like, the beginning.
Yeah.
Which was a retcon in itself, but that retcon works really well.
Speaking of George's death, I think a big thing is that those two deaths play into this mythology really, really heavily. In that, with Gwen and George, they're both, in the mainline continuity, they're dead.
Yeah.
Like, I know there was the whole thing with the clone almost immediately after this. We're not going to dive into that because that's complicated.
Yeah.
One of these days we'll do an episode on just clones.
To be fair, eventually they tried retconning away that she wasn't even really a clone. If you read Secret Wars 2, I believe, where the Beyonder reveals that, it turns out the Jackal couldn't clone people. He used a genetic virus to make people look like that or some bullshit like that.
But, whereas Mary Jane was very much alive and was written for decades after these. And so I think a lot of where this mythology really plays into people and stems a lot from this is that it's easy to hold a character up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And to kind of romanticize them when they're dead and then another character's alive.
Yeah. I mean, it's really telling when, like, I feel like so many people gravitated towards Spider-Gwen purely because she's more interesting. And because of the fact that, well, yes, she looks like a character we know, she's not that character. And in my opinion, in some ways, I wish she would have been the Gwen we had from the start, just because she's so much more interesting. Spider powers are not.
But so that's just one thing that has really influenced a lot of these Spider-Man mythos. Is just one death.
Yeah.
And I think Conway brought up something really good in there. Is that, did Peter play a part in this? Because I know that in the issue the Goblin says she was dead.
Dead. Yeah.
Before that. And then there's all that shit in Clone Conspiracy where Slott tried to retcon. So who knows at this point? I would actually argue it's up to the reader.
I would say yes and no, given the fact that... I think
the next snap is definitely...
The moment you see the snap on the screen, or on the screen, the page, like, clearly Conway wanted you to wonder, was she dead while she was falling, or was she...
Was she dead before she even got knocked off?
Which I want to say... There's some weird stuff in there, too, as an aside, like, where the Goblin's like, fool, just falling off the bridge would have killed her from shock, which I'm like, the fuck are you talking about, Norm?
Not really, but...
You're supposed to be a scientist, Norm. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But,
and as you brought up earlier, with this issue kind of marking the end of the Silver Age, I actually wrote my graduate thesis on the comic book scare and kind of how that affected comic books in the long run, which I actually cited this as a big major event because it is like it said.
Yeah.
It's the end of the Silver Age because a hero actually spectacularly fails and it results in...
Pun not intended.
Yeah, obviously. Amazingly fails. But not only that, it just... That was so unprecedented at that time. You didn't have that, primarily because the Comic Book Code Authority at the time did not want that kind of stuff where, someone dies because the hero fails.
Yeah.
Well, they tried it and tested it with George dying.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it was Gwen, someone who was very, very close to Peter romantically, just was a huge move towards writing those kind of stories and being able to publish them without having any kind of blowback.
Yeah.
In a sense, blowback from the Comic Book Code Authority, because there was blowback from this.
Well, and everyone always talks about how it's the big end, which I'm like, that end had been coming for a while. And admittedly, I do argue it still was with Spider-Man. Especially because, again, the drug issues with Harry, the fact that like Stan talked a lot about like political issues in these issues. Like we have Flash going to Vietnam. You have in the ancient, even though it's a stupid ass story, the Ancient Tablet Saga, where we have like black children or black college students, like
protesting about housing.
About housing, like I everyone always talks about how like
there's that politician that's in the George Stacy issues
who's a racist, but like I always argue that like while I think that was the final like
nail in the coffin,
the final nail in the coffin. The end of the Silver Age had been coming for a long time, and admittedly, thanks to Spider-Man in a lot of ways, for good and for bad. Because, like, I always argue these stories are important. I also argue it set this really annoying trend where they would constantly be killing people off in Spider-Man books, to the point where, like, it's amazing Spider-Man kept fucking going.
Or they would, one thing I've noticed is they constantly harken back to this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's, like I mentioned earlier, when he's getting ready to marry MJ, he goes to the bridge and is talking to a picture of Gwen. There's that. The fact the first Raimi movie does this.
Yeah.
With obviously with Mary
Jane.
Hell,
to the point where they dress her up. They dress her up in in the outfit.
At the very beginning of that.
Yeah.
They've done it in TASM too.
Which again, they put her in the outfit.
They in MC2 they mention that's where Normie wants to meet Peters. Meet me at the bridge. He'll know what won.
Although admittedly they did that because they've actually changed their mind multiple times in the comics, whether it was the George Washington Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge. I think nowadays they've settled on Brooklyn.
Yeah,
just because it's the more iconic.
More so,
bridge.
It's the fact that Normie knows about that. Less so than them not wanting to pick a name. More, I'm talking more in universe.
Well, in universe, yes. I'm just more going by like. Knowing Tom DeFalco's like, I'm not going to have this argument about which bridge it is. Just say the bridge. Knowing DeFalco, because that man was amazing, and he did a lot of cool stuff.
They do it in Marvel Knights.
Do it in Marvel. Oh my god, they do.
Remember, because Norman threw Mary Jane off that, and Peter mentions he's thought of how to redo this whole thing.
Not only that,
1,000 times. They do it in the Ultimate.
Yeah.
The Ultimate comics where Norman throws Mary Jane off. I don't think it's a bridge. I think it's a. It is a bridge. I thought it was a building at first. But
they actually go to the bridge a couple of times. They go to a bridge a couple of times in the Ultimate line, trying to be like, "Oh, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen." It's like
yes, it.
And
like you were saying, it's an annoying trend of
like they did it like 7 fucking times in the Clone Saga, or at least it felt like that from someone who's read most of it.
I want to say he dumps Ben's ashes off of that. I want to say.
I don't know if it was...
I'd have to go back and look.
I actually want to say, I think he did it off the top of his apartment building, but he might have done it off the bridge, which I'm like, Jesus, Peter, can you be smoky somewhere else?
It's an interesting legacy because it's such a huge landmark issue, and undoubtedly it's a really important one with Spider-Man mythos and just Spider-Man in general. But it's also kind of like... It's something that when they harken back to,
oh my god, you just
a lot of us are just like, I'm fucking tired of this.
No, like
being brought back.
Well, especially because like as much as because for the record, him and I are not like anti-Gwen people. If you like Gwen, that's more power to you.
I ship him with all three. I ship him with MJ. I ship him with Gwen. And I ship him with Felicia. I like all three. Yeah. I like MJ more than the other two, but I still like all three.
But, like
hell, I even ship him with Sue Storm, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, but like again,
it's very shippable.
Like I'm sure even Gwen fans are tired of having her corpse basically just dragged out on the street. Especially because sometimes they do it in such sickening ways, such as Sins Past, where Peter has to dig her body to get like.
And I know there are people that, granted, again, this is Tumblr, so this brings out the worst in a lot of fandoms.
Yeah.
I know there are people that basically blame Sins Past on Mary Jane fans.
Yeah.
For some reason. To the point that they think that One More Day was like penance for it. And I'm just like, that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Because MJ looks so fucking great in Sins Past, Miss. I knew you had children.
That's what they mean.
Oh, okay.
Is that it's
penance,
eye for an eye.
Which I sincerely doubt that was in Quesada's mind when he even made Straczynski do that. But like, I mean, granted, like for Gwen fans, I'm like, are you proud of that story? Because let me tell you, as someone who read that when it was coming out, even I was like, this is gross.
This is ass.
And I was like 16 when
this is pure ass, basically.
Actually, no, I was like 13.
I'm glad they've retconned that, so that didn't happen. They finally fixed that shit.
I think they just fucking retcon or fix one more day. Like, but you know, even then, like, let's be honest. I don't even think Lee wanted Gwen to win out in the end. Because, let's be honest.
I don't think he wanted her dead.
Well, I don't think he wanted her dead, but when he killed George Stacy, that pretty much severed any chance Peter had of being with Gwen. Especially to the point where he was like, I'm going to marry Gwen, and I'm not going to tell her I'm Spider-Man. And I'm like, Peter.
How's that going to work?
How
in the fuck is that going to work?
You know, like
him not being home on time. Like,
yeah.
Does he think Gwen wouldn't just assume that he's cheating on her?
Especially because Gwen is as smart as he is. Like, she's just as much of a science major as he was, or is. But, like, no, like, in my opinion, I think even Lee didn't want her to win that. And as much as people like to think that Lee, you know, because he created Gwen, but at the same time, he created Mary Jane, too. And Mary Jane, has always been
the more popular one.
Hell, to the point where, like, you know, he would have whoever was drawing the book, he would have her in, like, beautifully skimpy outfits. He'd have her be the life of the party, fun, vivacious. And while Gwen was when he began, he slowly realized, I can't have both Gwen and MJ be the life of the party because there's nothing interesting about that. Which is why eventually she devolved into the character that we know at the end of her life.
Which is like kind of like very... I would actually argue near the end, Gwen was very much like a sobby kind of character, which sucks because I liked what they were doing initially, where, you know, she was like she was going to college with Peter, you know, she obviously was very, very intelligent. It feels like near the end they kind of were trying to dumb that down, honestly, and I'm like, I don't understand why.
To the point where they were doing stuff like her being in a fucking bikini when they're in the Savage Land, which is probably one of the most infamous things ever, because it's like,
why?
Why
though?
Like, not like that, you had to go to the North Pole, Gwen. You had to be in, like, the snow. And suddenly you get to the Savage Land, you're like, well, time to get naked. I certainly wouldn't.
That's when Marvel editors looking at you like, it's comics, you're not supposed to fucking think that hard.
I mean, maybe so, but I don't think Mary Jane would have been doing that in the Savage Land.
Editors, stop thinking. Just buy the book and move on.
Actually, knowing MJ, she'd be like, "Oh, Kazar. Well, let me get into this loincloth and just call me Mary Jane. You Kazar, me Jane." But
Jesus Christ.
Actually, no, I don't think Sheena, the she-devil, his girlfriend, would like that very much. And yes,
okay,
her name is Sheena the
she-devil.
she-devil.
Get off the Savage Land.
Sorry. I don't know why I got on it.
We've never done anything on the Savage Land.
I guess it's just because I was excited to talk about the Savage Land. I'm sorry. So getting on to Arctic Vibranium. No, I'm kidding.
But no, so it's interesting that such a mythos has really spawned around just one, well, rather two issues.
Yeah.
In a hugely long and popular run of just Spider-Man comics in general. Like,
yeah.
These are two of the big ones, basically.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, it's also... Both of these also have Peter being kind of
an asshole?
Well, more like kind of to blame for both deaths, because, like, even when it was because Peter used this web fluid that somehow made it so that Doc Ock lost control of his arms briefly, which is what caused the chimney to
mess with his mental connection.
Yeah. Which I'm like... I don't know what he fucking put in that webbing.
Listen, that's just some pseudoscience shit. Don't think too hard.
I got it. I put some of Harry's LSD into my web fluid. So when it hit Otto, he got a contact high.
Fuck out of here. I don't even think he was on LSD when that happened.
You never know.
No, I actually don't think that was...
No, I think that was when he was kind of on the wagon. But yeah, because like that leads to, of course, George's death, which is not a good look for Peter. In fact, I want to say during that, he considered stop being Spider-Man for a while there, too.
I think.
Yeah.
They don't have those issues in here, but I believe that was let's be honest, he's considered doing that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And he can't do it.
Which is why it was so frustrating when, after the final chapter, when he burns his costume, he's like, I'm never going to be Spider-Man again. cue the new #1 of Amazing, where I gotta be Spider-Man again. That was only like 2 months, but where's I going with this? But yeah, like it's kind of interesting that both Stacy's deaths are kind of on his hands in a way. More so, I argue George's than Gwen's, just because I mean, both are accidents, but like, because I want to say he stopped using that web fluid altogether after.
I don't think it's ever shown up again.
No, like
at least off the top of my head, I can't think of when it has ever reappeared.
The next time Peter ever had that easy of a time fighting Ock was when he'd put Felicia in the hospital and he just ripped the fucking arms out of Watto because he's like, no, I've had enough of your bullshit. Rip. But Gwen, of course, also talking about Gwen, her death cemented yet even more the reason why Norman Osborn is Peter's most dangerous foe, or the one that's so personal, because Peter and him had this back and forth at this point for a while, but I don't think Norman had ever delivered a blow to Peter nearly as badly as what he's done here. The only one I think coming close would be when he killed Ben.
Slash had a role in Mayday.
Oh, yeah, Slash had a role in
Mayday's miscarriage.
Though, of course, they have to pretend that doesn't exist anymore thanks to one.
Well, they've never clarified with that either, which is frustrating.
Yeah, it really is.
Hell, even in MC2, they have an issue keeping it straight, basically.
Well, to be fair, they kind of try to say and omit that, like, they've never even tried to have children because, like, MJ's like, we can't have children because you're Spider-Man, and that would be really irresponsible. To which I want to be like, oh yeah, Joe, Reed Richards and Sue Storm told you to stop being a big baby.
I was just about to bring up that Reed and Sue have 2 kids, and
fuck, if you want to
technically there's Cable.
Yeah.
Which maybe that's a bad example to bring up as Cable.
Well, if you want me to go to DC, Roy Harper raised a little girl on his own for a long fucking time before someone decided to fucking murder her. I think people can just fine have children. Hell, Batman has 17 children at this point.
Clark and Lois have kids.
Clark and Lois have kids. Even before that, he was mentoring Connor.
Yeah,
so fuck off.
That might be a great topic for another video, which is just what is comic books issues with parents? Because I think that'd be a great discussion at some point.
To be fair, it's not even parents. It's just they're certain characters can't have kids.
That doesn't make fucking sense.
But anyway, we're getting a little off the rails.
Divulging.
Of course, we also get the death of the Green Goblin. Goblin.
To be fair with this, he was actually dead for a while.
No, because for
a long while he was actually dead.
It was 23 years if I remember correctly. Because it was then of course, his death of course led to so many other things, such as the 2 other Green Goblins, the Hobgoblin, the shitty Hobgoblin that nobody likes, which I've talked about before.
Him coming back with Clone Saga.
Him doing the Last Temptation of Jesus with Peter for some fucking weird reason. But it's just kind of interesting.
When we think the pinnacle of Norman being a villain, this is really what we look at.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's one of the selected couple that we really look at.
Yeah.
This is like the pinnacle, top of the pyramid, basically.
To the point where I remember I was reading Spider-Man's Tangled Web because I actually was subscribed to that. I think have almost every issue of that because it eventually got canceled. I think it only had 12 issues. You've seen some of them, I'm pretty sure. But one of them is there's a side story where all these villains go to this villain bar, which I'm pretty sure is a thing nowadays where the villains all hang out at a bar in New York. And it has a bunch of Spider-Man's rogues, including Alyosha, aka Kraven the Hunter 3. And they're sitting around talking about their encounters with Spider-Man, and they're all trying to top each other. Kind of like actually Batman Anti-Sators almost got him. And at the end, this guy, because there's this guy sitting there with a trench coat and a fedora, and you're like, who the fuck is that? And they're like, what makes you so special? And the dude sets down a pumpkin bomb, gets up and goes, took his girlfriend to a bridge, killed her, and threw her off. And he just it's just Norman. He
does not elaborate. Leaves.
No, it also kind of implies that because he turns into the Green Goblin outside and it implies he blows the fucking bar up, which I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that this killed the Vulture and all these other supervillains. Yeah. But no, like, it really shows just how,
Important these issues
are. I mean, to the point that, again, a lot of these issues have been shown in cinema multiple times. Like, the death of Norman at the end of Spider-Man 1 is straight up, for the most part.
Throwing MJ off the bridge.
TASM
2 when Harry throws Gwen
off the clock tower or whatever the fuck that was.
It was a clock tower.
I can't remember because I've erased huge portions of that movie from my memory banks. The fact that, like, in No Way Home we're getting MJ or Michelle thrown off of something because
building site. I'm pretty sure it's a building site.
It's like a construction site.
Because the scaffolding is what they're on.
Yeah. Which is weird because I think it's implying that they're, like, fighting around the Statue of Liberty getting, I guess, renovated?
Oh, yeah, because they're changing it into Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, they show that in Hawkeye.
Oh.
It's in the background.
Oh, yeah, okay. I might not have noticed that.
They're giving the Statue of Liberty the shield.
Okay. That seems a little in poor taste, but... it was made by the French.
I've seen it blown up numerous times in movies. There is no poor taste.
I mean, fair. Well, I was gonna be like, it was the French that gave it to us. So
Didn't we see the thing under a fucking fuck ton of sand in Planet of the Apes?
Oh God!
You want to talk to me about poor taste?
Do you think that means that in that universe they had to go back to that movie and re-edit in like a little shield and like make it look like Captain America?
I don't think they gave a shit.
No, that weird things to think about, but I'm thank you for telling me that because I never noticed that they were doing that in the movie.
Oh, because they only show it like very, very briefly.
Okay. But yeah, if we could say any sort of like negatives about these, like I said, I think for me it set this annoying precedent where we had to like kill characters in comics, and like again, like I'm not saying characters can't die in comics because that would be ludicrously stupid because that's not
get
real.
Boring real quick.
Yeah, and not only that, that's not real. Like, real life doesn't work that way. But, like, at the same time, like, I can count so many characters that came after Gwen's death that weighed on Spider-Man's character in stupid ways. Again, like, briefly after... Joan DeWolf, Ned Leeds, like, multiple members of the Daily Bugle, Aunt May eventually, multiple times. The fact they tried killing MJ off during that stupid Stalker storyline.
I don't want to ever talk about that. I was so worried the PS4 game was going to do that shit.
To be fair,
Until they basically came out in the Miles game. We're like, no, we're not doing that. I'm like, thank God.
Well, because
no one liked that story.
No, I don't even think Joe Quesada could come out and be like, yeah, that story was shit. But, your thoughts on any sort of negatives you would say with these?
Just as you said, it really set this precedent where anyone and everyone that dies, Spider-Man takes it like on his own shoulders, which I can kind of get if it wasn't like he took it just as personally as Gwen's death.
Yeah, that's...
As well as it set up this whole mythologizing of Gwen.
Yeah.
Which I feel isn't good for the character because it's a romanticized version that wasn't how the character actually was.
Very much so. I also think it's really impressive that they've left her dead for so long. And I know someone's gonna be like, "Well, Spider-Gwen and Gwenpool, like those are different characters. They don't count."
Gwenpool isn't even Gwen Stacy. That's Gwendolyn Poole. It's a different character altogether.
I actually didn't know that her full name was Gwendolyn Poole.
Yeah,
that is the funniest fucking shit I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's not Gwenpool isn't even Gwen.
Oh my God. So she's like Harley Quinn. She's like Harleen Quinzel. That's fucking hilarious. I didn't actually know that about Gwenpool. That's funny as fuck.
I'm surprised you didn't know that.
Because to be fair, I've not really... She's been kind of in the periphery of my mind. Like, I know of her, but like at the same time, I'm just like, oh God, another Deadpool character. I need to get her... I need to pick up some of her stuff at some point, because I'm sure I would like it. It's just... That was that time where there was so much Gwen shit happening at that time. I was just like, I'll wait until it's kind of blown over. Of course, now we're getting that weird Gweniverse thing where she's going to be like Cyclops and Wolverine and everyone.
I'm waiting to see how it is. I'll probably pick that up in trade.
Like, didn't we just have Miles Morales going through a clone saga or weird shit like that?
Yeah, he went through a clone saga. That was when I was actually still subbed.
Yeah, but
wrapping up basically. How would you rate these issues?
George Stacy, I probably would rate like an 8 out of 10 because like as much as like it's important, like his death is really not important to
The central focus.
The central focus of that story. It's simply a product of the story. I mean, they're still really good, and you get to watch Spider-Man fight Dr. Octopus, so always enjoyable. The Gwen issues, I probably would give them an 8 out of 10, but more just because like I think I've read them so much, and that while they're important for me, like it's a very quick read, and it's more kind of just the after that's so much more important to this story than it is the actual story itself, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. I'm going to give it an 8.5 for Death of Gwen. For the very exact reason you just stated, is that I've seen it done so many times, and it's kind of lessened its impact for me. Like, I know the impact of it, Yeah. I know the importance of it to the mythos, I know the importance of it to the characters. But at the same time, as a reader, I've seen it done so many times that it's just lessened its impact. George, I'm probably going to give a 7 out of 10 because, as we mentioned, him dying isn't the central focus of the issues. It's the Doc Ock issues. And I'll be honest, like the first 2 issues of that, they're really forgettable in my opinion.
Oh, very much so. It's just about Doc.
It's just another Doc Ock and Spidey fight story, which is enjoyable. I mean, I would rather read that than most other comics, but it's also, it doesn't offer you anything new.
It certainly doesn't lead to thoughts of him banging on May.
You're right, that's later.
That's him eating fried chicken with. That's such a weird.
Where do you guys rank these stories? Let us know in the comments. Any final thoughts, Adam?
Not really. I think I've pretty much talked about everything I want to talk about with these. And like we said, if you want to pick these up,
they've been reprinted in a couple different things. I mean, I went for the hardback because I used this while I was writing my thesis for grad school. Yeah. You can get these in paperback.
Yeah, that's the one thing I like about the Essentials.
You can get the actual reprinted floppies of these a lot. Yeah. You can get them in the Epic Collection, Essentials, the Omnibus. You can get these. These are widely available. I don't think they've ever been out of print.
No, I'm pretty sure they've reprinted them since the beginning. If you want to see some stuff that talks about these issues, but like not really the issues, you can pick up Marvels. Although, admittedly, I argue Marvels is one of the bigger ones that romanticizes Gwen.
Yeah.
I know there's a story. Spider-Man Blue. There's a story. There's a Spider-Man series known as Weblines that delves into a bit about like
Peter's. You mean Web Slingers?
Maybe it was Web Slingers.
Because I have that. Remember, I have that in trade.
Yeah, maybe it's Web Slingers. I want to say it was either Web Slingers or Lifeline. Maybe it was called Lifeline.
I think you're thinking of
no, I'm thinking of a different
Web
story.
Slingers because you kept calling this Lifeline.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I don't know where you're getting the Lifeline thing from.
It might be just because in my head I'm taking Web Slingers and Lifeline. It was called Webline, but I think you were right. It was called Web Slingers. Just because there's so
Web
many
Spinners. I think it's Web Spinners.
Yeah, Web Spinners. Because it was like this weird anthology.
Yeah, it's an anthology series.
And yeah, like there's been so many anthologies that go into Gwen's death. There's actually I think an issue of Exiles where they actually go to the land, or no, there's some story where they go to the land of the dead, and Death is like just sitting there chilling and talking to Gwen about like life, the universe, and everything. It's very surreal. And I think she even brings up how she misses Peter. But yeah, that's pretty much my final thoughts. If you want to talk about Gwen, there it is. Let us know what you thought about it in the comments, and look forward to more Spideymas when it comes. I'm not sure how much more we've got. We've got a few things coming your way, but until then, guys, I'm Zongetsu134.
And as always, I'm Average Joe Squad.
And as always, we ask you,
remember the hyphen.
And take care.